So let's bring in now the chairman of the Democratic Caucus, Congressman Joe Crowley of New York. Hey, Joe, always great talking to you.
Thanks, Joe.
A lot of quick questions for you to ask you, then I'll turn it over to everybody else. First of all, what do you think about the president's infrastructure proposal, where he says here's the big infrastructure plan, but the federal government's not going to fund any of it. It's going to be up to the state and local governments to do that.
That's exactly right. What he has proposed so far, at least what we've been hearing about, is a $200 billion investment in infrastructure. That comes out to, Joe, $20 billion a year. That sounds a lot like a lot of money, but in reality, we know that we're bleeding in terms of infrastructure. We're not investing enough in that. And what Democrats are proposing is a $1 trillion investment by the federal government. And what the president is relying upon is the robust nature of the state and local governments, that somehow they're going to take up the slack and make an 80% investment to go with a 20% investment by the federal government. It doesn't work that way. It's the opposite way that it works.
Yeah, so and let's talk about John Kelly, obviously the other big headline in the news today. Should John Kelly leave the White House?
I had the great experience of being with then General Kelly in Iraq about a decade ago. I saw him in action. I was so impressed by him, but I'm not so sure that those skills transfer to White House Chief of Staff, quite frankly. What the men and women in our military see and what we see now, I think, is woefully lacking. Having said that, though, I think he's brought some modicum of calm to the White House. It's all relative in terms of what one would consider calm. And for that reason, I think the president probably will hold on to him as long as he can.
Do you think that's a good idea?
I don't think so. I think what's happened recently in the Porter debacle once again shows not only the insensitivity, but the deafness to what's happening throughout our country today when it comes to the issue of the Me Too movement and women, especially, to ignore the fact that these individuals, we saw a woman with a black eye over the weekend constantly, and yet to have that dismissed by the president and as such by Kelly is very disturbing, I think, to Americans.
So, Congressman, it's Katty Kay here in Washington. You've been traveling around the country, talking to Democrats, trying to help them raise money. To what extent are you hearing this sense of concern, particularly amongst female voters, about what's happening in the White House and the president's attitude towards women? Is it real, do you think? Is it translating into votes? Will it translate into votes in November? Well,
it seems to be the president very Teflon on this. You know, it's one gaffe after another. This White House is in a total disarray and in chaos. And yet the president, you know, he holds on to that 35% of supporters out there and continues to dish red meat to them in terms of that support. So I think really what it comes down to is I think most Americans are disgusted by this, and they'll have an opportunity to express that in the 2018 elections and beyond. But right now, I think the president is just trying to shift the discussion to infrastructure. We'll see if he's successful in not stepping on his own plan, as Joe mentioned earlier.
Congressman, I wanted to ask you about immigration, because the Senate is going to start taking up various immigration proposals this week. Presumably, the House will as well, eventually. I don't think we know exactly when that's going to happen. But I wonder what your sense is of how eager both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are to get a deal, because it seems to me that the status quo may not be a horrible thing politically for Democrats, especially because they don't want to cut a deal with the president for fear of not resisting enough and alienating their base. Do you really think that we can get something done to protect the Dreamers? I don't only think we can. I think we have to. It's really a moral imperative for us to do this, to address the issue of not only these 700,000+ individuals with souls who are in limbo right now. The president continues to take additional hostages. He's now expanded it to another 1 million people that who are too lazy, apparently, as John Kelly has said, to get off their butts to actually DACA. And he's expanded it also to the TPS, those who are in temporary protective status. Over almost 250,000 El Salvadorians who've been here for 25 years, own homes, businesses, they have children and grandchildren who are American citizens. The president is now saying, send them back. They're part of this as well, I think, now. So we need to find a solution to it. I'm not convinced that Paul Ryan will let anything on the floor that doesn't have the president's support, and what that means we don't know. And McConnell has been also a bit abstract about this in terms he'll let something come out of the Senate. We think it'll be much more conservative than anything we'd like to support.
Congressman, could you talk to me a little bit about how important you think the release of the rebuttal to the Nunes memo is in trying to advance what Democrats' message might be? And is it problematic that the Nunes memo has been out for so long and that the Democratic memo might end up being released a couple weeks or even a month after?
It's not about the Democratic message here being stepped on. It's the willful act to undermine the FBI, the CIA, our intelligence gathering, law enforcement, Justice Department. That's what this memo was about. It's directed at Rod Rosenstein to get him dismissed and fired, and therefore take control over the Mueller investigation. That's what the release of the Republican memo was all about from the get-go. Purely a political document. It does not have the goodwill or intention of the goodwill of the American people, unfortunately. And I think that history will not look back kindly on what Devin Nunes did here in terms of the release of this memo.
All right, Congressman Joe Crowley, as always, it's great talking to you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Joe.